Hello, welcome to the Breakthrough Hiring Show. I'm your host, James Mackey. We got Steve Bartel back with us today. Steve, what's going on?
Hey, good to be here.
And for everybody tuning in that hasn't heard one of Steve's past episodes, Steve, would you mind just doing a quick introduction on yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Steve. I'm the co-founder CEO at Gem. I've been building Gem for about 8 years. At Gem, we're building the only AI first all-in-one recruiting platform. So what that means is we take your sourcing, your CRM, your ATS, scheduling, plus full funnel analytics, and a database of 650 million public profiles that you can source from, and then thread AI through the entire product. But yeah, that's what we're up to. Over to you, James.
Cool. Today we have, I think, a very action-packed episode, a lot of stuff to cover. Before we get into some really cool things regarding AI, how candidates are leveraging it in the interview process, and what that's going to look like as candidates are, companies are both leveraging it. And then we can get into that. We also discussed talking a little bit about what you're up to at Gym, some of the more recent product and feature releases. We want to talk a little bit about candidate rediscovery, which I
Yep,
think would be really interesting as well, and making that whole process a lot more effective and valuable to organizations. I think there's a lot left on the table when it comes to rediscovery, so that'll be cool to dive
totally.
into that as well.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Yeah, so let's just start out with the market. Last thing I checked, as of an hour ago, I think Trump's threatening like an additional 50% tariff on China due to the fact that they put out reciprocal tariffs of 34, 36% or whatever it is. Of course, we saw a massive market contraction. And then within that, like tech, of course, being one of the most volatile sectors, I think the whole market was down like 5%-ish. Don't quote me, but it's like basically, and then I think tech was at least temporarily down closer to 12 last week or something crazy like that, if I remember correctly in the journal. So I'm sure hopefully maybe some of that's just like temporary, just shock, right, to the market and tariffs. But it's definitely a really uncertain time right now. And I'm curious if you're hearing anything from customers. I know like we have early earnings call coming out probably in a few weeks. CEOs are going to be talking. But just is there any kind of word on the street, Gym customers or your advisors or VCs, or what are you hearing out there?
Yeah, totally. So first of all, I think it's really hard to know how this stuff shakes out. I do think that the market correction has probably been an overcorrection. When you think about the overall GDP of the US, interestingly, we're a very heavy like services country as it relates to GDP. I think 70% of our GDP is from services industry. And I think only 10, 20% or something like that is from trade. And a lot of that is actually between Canada and Mexico and the US. And so when you take that factor out, it's even less. And so when you think about the market correction that's happened, what did you say, 10, 12% or something like that
Well,
down?
within tech, I think I saw that. Like, it was one of the bar graph things. I think the overall market lost like 5% and it wiped out like 6 trillion-ish or something in market value.
And so I
Like,
think that's like an overcorrection because when you just do the simple math on this stuff, tariffs aren't going to reduce that GDP down to zero
yeah.
or even half of what it is. They're going to add some friction. But so first of all, I think it's like an overcorrection. The second thing is it's really hard to know how this stuff is going to shake out because a lot of people believe that the administration is doing this to set them up for like negotiations.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like imbalance in terms of how tariffs work when you look across different countries. And actually, a lot of the tariffs out there are pretty unfair to the US in the sense that the US has a much lower tariff on these countries than they have on us when they're importing our goods. And so a lot of people think these across the board tariffs are just to get people to the negotiating table to negotiate tariffs that are more reciprocal across the board. It's really hard to say how this stuff's going to shake out until another few weeks or a month or a few months pass, and we can actually see what's the strategy behind this and does it work or does it not?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right, like it could be temporary, but I'm wondering like it is to some extent. We did this once before, the United States. It was a really long time ago. The president called, I think it was like McKinsey. I'd have to go double check. But there was one time, maybe not McKinsey. I'll have to go back and double check, but I'll put it in the notes of the episode.
Cool.
I forget his name. I think it was that, but he did a tariff strategy where essentially like the United States was in like a massive, was in a lot of debt and implemented a tariff strategy. And back in the day, like before income tax, that's actually how the government like collected a lot of income was through tariffs. And then as the essentially we implemented the income tax, tariffs went down, income tax went up, and that is essentially modern day United States. It's how we collect, the government collects the revenue is income tax. So this has been done before in the past, and it actually did take the country from being in a significant amount of debt to a surplus.
Mm,
And to a point where it's like almost like you don't necessarily want a country to be in too big of a surplus because what are they doing with that money, right? Like the money should be, you should be taxing just enough to essentially provide what you need to. So you don't necessarily want a surplus, but you definitely don't want the debt that we have now. And so back in the day when they did this, it did work. But then essentially in the second term, this president did away with it. It was no longer working. But these things are so complicated.
yep.
I wasn't like, from what I was researching into it, it really wasn't clear if it wasn't working because they were at a surplus and it just changed the market dynamics and it just wasn't valuable anymore. It was just hurting them or something else. The thing is, though, again, like this happened, this was over 100 years ago.
Right.
The economy is obviously like completely different these days. There's a lot more trade occurring, even if it's a minority of the our GDP. And then there's a connectivity of globalization and other industries and or excuse me, countries. I don't know the percentage of GDP for them. And then there's so much of the market on confidence, right? And
Yep.
if people pause spending even more, how that could impact things. And then even short term, if Mexico, Canada prices are increased on goods become more expensive for Americans, if that heats up inflation, I'm not an economist, but I'm just wondering, does that just stop when you lower the tariffs? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
No, it's a really
I don't
interesting
know.
question. I think these things are super complex, and that's why there's not really
Yeah, it's like,
a clear-cut answer to foreign policy or tariffs and stuff like that. And something that happened 100 years ago might not play out the same way today, like you mentioned. And so I think all of this is to say people are feeling a lot of uncertainty right now, to your original question, because it's really hard to know how this stuff shakes out. And it's still early days. We're trying to keep a pulse on this with our customers and then also our prospects, folks that are considering looking at GEM. Whenever we see uncertainty, we think, all right, how can we best serve our customers? How can we best serve prospective buyers who might be thinking about GEM? And the good news is like we've been through a few of these cycles as an industry, and so we've learned a lot. We've learned that when there's more uncertainty in the market or when companies are like really slowing down hiring, that there's a much stronger need for lower cost all-in-one consolidation. It can save companies money, also help unify their stack. There's a lot of benefits to having everything under one roof. And we've even come up with some pretty creative ways for companies that want to embark on this longer term journey of moving towards all in one to get started today with a nominal amount of spend and then only start paying us as like their different renewals come up for the pieces that are on their current stack. And in this way, people can benefit from having the all in one platform out of the gate, but like never be double paying for the different line items that they already had.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
smart.
how we think about it internally is like, how can we best serve our customers and the market when there's a lot of uncertainty? Because no one wants to be, the last thing somebody wants to be doing is double paying for tools when they're headed into a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's definitely for sure. By the way, I just fact checked myself. I think I thought McKinsey. I was thinking the consulting firm was saying McKinley.
Ah,
And it was in
yeah,
the 1890s, and he was a huge advocate of tariffs. So I recommend people look it up. It is fascinating. I've wrapped my head around it, I think, as much as I have time for. But anyways, interesting stuff. And yeah,
love it.
due to
Good lesson.
yeah, for sure. It's again the tariffs like, oh, that's like a simple thing, right? Like it's pretty straightforward. And then it turns out, no, not really. But yeah, in terms of how I think people are thinking about the market right now is I think a lot of folks are in a holding pattern, right? Particularly in the industries that are directly impacted like manufacturing, for instance. They're not
Totally.
just going out like, hey, let's open up plants. Because that's like a massive multi-million dollar endeavor that takes 1 to 3 years to even get them productive. So
Yep.
we're just kind of okay, we just have to wait. Nobody really knows. And I think it just for me, it's like I run two companies. I have a recruiting services company and I have the software company June for Secure Vision. It's I don't really know how it's going to impact us. I can say right now our customers in different industries, really nobody, the only customers of companies I've heard pausing and not making decisions are really manufacturing and supply chain. Like they're
Yeah.
basically at a standstill, like any kind of deals and pipeline related to that is just they're not considering, they're just not moving forward. But in other industries, it's essentially it's weird. It's like business as usual almost, despite all of this stuff happening in the background. So I guess that's good, right? And I think though, like in terms of customers like thinking about like spending all in one, that's still been the trend for the past few years, right? I think
Yeah.
and the market's going into that direction and consolidation, which is I think it's a good thing. So for customers, I think that they still want companies still want that when it comes to hiring and tech stacks, consolidation. I think also this idea of being able to access gym like different products like just to get onboarded, to
Yep.
get them started, to start adding value, pull give them help them where they need it, and then transition them into a full stack or a full product suite customer is
Yeah.
definitely the way to go because I think folks are like looking for all in one, they're looking for flexibility, but this is a macro trend regardless of what happens, right? Even if
Yeah.
the economy gets hit mid to long term because of this, it really doesn't change, I don't think, too much how companies are going to think about hiring or particularly the technology that they're going to be using. If anything, it's just further reinforcement that we need to optimize tech and be very lean as an organization, how we think about talent acquisition.
That's right. If anything, I think it just accelerates that trend.
Yeah, it's just like the same thing though. It's not like pivoting, I don't think, really.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, that'll be really interesting
Yeah.
to see what happens here. But I think just too, it's interesting that all this market uncertainty and consolidation and cost scrutiny and all these types of things is taking place alongside a lot of innovation in the AI space, which actually enables companies to be a lot more effective with their spend. But I guess before we get into the company side of AI, we wanted to talk about how candidates are leveraging it in the interview process.
Yeah.
So this isn't actually a side that I've done as much research into. I'm curious if you wouldn't mind just sharing with me and the audience, like what are the biggest use cases that candidates are leveraging for AI and their for applying to jobs and things like that.
Yeah, so the two biggest things that I'm hearing from like the market, from customers, when I'm at conferences and things like that, talking to folks in the industry are one, some candidates are starting to adopt tools that make it really easy to apply to hundreds of roles all at the same time while still personalizing their cover letter and their resume to the opportunity. And so it's basically reducing the friction dramatically to apply to roles.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that in a sec. The second is I was speaking on a panel at Transform, and I think the moderator asked, so what does everybody think about candidates using generative AI in the hiring process, like for actual interviews? And so I thought that was a fascinating question. But yeah, I'm really curious to get your take on that one too, James, in terms of,
Let's,
yeah.
so when they were talking about candidates using generative AI in the interview process, what were did they give any more, like what specifically were you guys talking about there?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of companies, so a lot of candidates, first of all, if they're on Zoom, they're realizing they can like use Gen AI to support themselves in the interview process. And a lot of
Yeah,
companies are
I
trying
guess
to
they
figure
just
out,
on
like,
ChatGPT at the same time.
yeah, like how do you think about that? How do you feel about candidates using Claude or ChatGPT or something like that? And my somewhat spicy take is we want candidates to be AI fluent.
Yeah, you don't want somebody who doesn't know how to use it, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
we want them to be
yeah,
using AI in their jobs. And so let's find a way for them to use AI in their interview process. In fact, let's actually encourage it in certain ways. I actually heard of this really cool interview. I forget which company this was. It was one of the leading AI companies. A friend of mine was on BizOps. She's never coded in her life. And this company said, "Hey, use Gen AI to code something up. It's like really simple, but like just do some pair programming with Gen AI and we'll
yeah,
we'll do it with you." And I just thought that was the coolest interview ever. She actually realized that she could code when she had never actually tried coding before.
yeah. Yeah, it's pretty wild. I think, frankly, if there is what comes to mind for me as an employer is, okay, are we going to be able to truly evaluate somebody's skill set, or are they going to get past us? I just don't think that's the case if you're interviewing correctly. Like, even
Right.
if somebody's using, I think of so many of the questions that folks should be asking is really, particularly if it's a role that requires experience, dialing into past experience, like walking you through projects, specific problems, how they overcame them. For sales, it's talking in numbers, right? ChatGPT can't tell you your average deal size and sales length and quota attainment, and can you get a reference from the previous direct manager to back that up? And ChatGPT is not going to help with those types of things too.
Totally.
I think too with behavioral questions, you could tie behavior into and personality attributes into talking about examples in the past, right? Just really dialing into their personal experiences, I think is and it's like personal professional experiences is like you can still evaluate people. I don't think that I think I would be a little bit like if somebody was using ChatGPT on an interview with me, like I would it's not that I would be worried that I was going to hire somebody that's not actually qualified, but it would still honestly maybe for me I don't know, but I feel like it's cheating. I,
Well,
I don't know. I just would be like weird as hell. Like I'm here to have a conversation with you.
yeah.
I think that would definitely be something that I would consider a yellow flag. Not because like I don't want people to leverage ChatGPT, but it's okay, look, we both know that we're trying to have a human to human interaction here. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think it's just weird. I think it's weird if somebody were to use ChatGPT on an interview.
I get it. I get it. But on the flip side, if we want our employees, our people to be using ChatGPT or Claude when they get hired, I don't know. It's almost, yeah, should we allow candidates to use generative AI as an extension of their brain? Here's an interesting analogy I was thinking about the other day. How old are you, James?
33.
33. All right. So
Yeah.
this might date me a little bit. I'm not sure if you had this experience growing up. In grade school, when you did research papers, do you remember having to go to the library and get citations for your book?
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember
Yeah.
that? And
Yeah.
did your teachers ever say, no, don't use Google, don't use Wikipedia?
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. I remember
Right?
that.
Do you remember
Yeah.
that? That memory stuck with me because I was like, I can get this information so much more easily by going to Wikipedia or doing a Google search. Yet I'm like being forced to go to the library, look in these
Right.
like, cards, these physical cards to find the book, then open the book and try to find the information I need just so that I can have an actual citation from like a physical book instead of using all the information at my fingertips on the internet.
Oh
And
yeah, for
so
sure.
I think of it in a very similar way of, hey, Gen AI is just going to be an extension of, so let's
Yeah.
face that.
Yeah, but like also you if you ask somebody a question on an interview 10 years ago, you wouldn't want them to Google an answer and try to find like an article. You just want to know, okay, what do you and part of it's like, hey, how do you leverage AI? How would you leverage AI? But I do think there should be some level of
That's a good litmus test, actually. If for the interview, depending on, so for the interview, if it's something where you'd want them not to Google, maybe you wouldn't want them to use Gen AI. But on the flip side, like, why, what is the rationale for that? Because on our jobs, we can
yeah.
Google things and
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think for me, it's like the whole reason I'm talking to somebody is to get a better understanding of their experience and skill set. It's like everybody has access to the same GTP, ChatGPT. So it's
yeah.
like, what I want to learn about you, not
The thing I liked
uh,
about this interview question that this company had designed for that candidate is it actually got folks using generative AI and got them to show how they think and how they
oh,
iterate.
I like that. I
I
like
like
the
that a lot.
idea of
Yeah.
bringing people in. Hey, can you leverage this tool to help think through this idea or to do this coding assessment? I think that would show how tech savvy somebody is, how well they can understand like prompt engineering or just or
Just like
creative,
figure something
adaptable,
out.
like
Yeah.
general
Yeah.
maybe even intelligence tests. I think that kind of stuff is really helpful. That's a cool motion. I do like that.
Here's maybe where I think I draw the line is, yeah, I wouldn't want candidates using generative AI as a way to substitute for learning how they think. And then maybe we just need to reimagine the questions we're asking that really understand how candidates think about a problem. Maybe the difference between Googling something and generative AI is it can actually spit out some pretty reasonable answers,
Yeah, for sure.
thinking through things in a way where a candidate could just parrot it back.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's
Fascinating.
interesting.
Yeah.
I don't mind. Yeah, I definitely want people who are leveraging Gen AI. I guess on the interview, I like the idea of it being some kind of like assignment or working session. I think that's really cool. I think I definitely would want to know how they would think about leveraging it in their job. But again, more of like their thought process and how they think about leveraging it and using it as an extension, as you said, to like their brain and their thought process.
And behind the scenes, they're just plugging that question into Gen AI and it's parroting back, here are 5 ways you could use it on your job. I'm just
Yeah, I know exactly. It's just, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think like the other thing with the applications is I think that's just gonna happen. I
Yep.
do think that's why there's a lot of value in a product like June, like with what I'm building, right? Because the market's gonna be flooded with applications that help people apply really fast, and the market's gonna be flooded with a lot of applications that are reviewing resumes and applications and doing that motion as well. So it's like it's like an arms race
Yep.
of AI, which system can outsmart the other. I think to the extent the recruiting industry can get away from keyword-based matching or searching for unqualified talent pools is really important. I think once you have some kind of evaluation step in place, whether through a recruiter or through or like a tool like June, I think then that kind of matching motion does become a lot more valuable because like one of the issues it's like with inbounds is you can do everything right as a sourcer or a product could do everything right. But then my concern would just be like people have a lot of access to tools and resources to put together resumes, put together like the keywords, tell the story. But it's again, it's and I guess people could still, even with an evaluation, I'll tell you what you want to hear. I think that the idea of having some kind of qualification step in place is really important to make those types of things valuable. Uh,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I could even see, yes, yeah, first of all, I agree. The arms race was something I was just reflecting on. And a lot of people are like, oh man, I wish folks wouldn't be using these AI tools. But the fact of the matter is, they make it so easy to apply. Like, of course, over the next few years, like every single candidate's going to be using these tools. If it helps them get more interviews and increases their chances, even at all, at
well,
getting
yeah,
it,
I think I don't
yeah,
have an issue with that at all. And I think
totally.
the noise to signal ratio, like though, is just the what is the it's clearly if it and it benefits companies because maybe there's people that wouldn't have found you or
Well,
didn't have time to apply.
that's the really interesting thing is I do actually think that if companies embrace AI as
Yeah,
well, so that they can get to the most qualified folks, then it benefits both sides because it essentially enables a much more efficient marketplace of candidates,
yeah,
job opportunities, whereas previously a candidate might be able to apply to, I don't know, 5, 10 roles a day. If they can apply to hundreds, but then the AI can bubble up the ones that are actually a fit, you remove all the human manual work from the process. Now you've got like an efficient marketplace.
yeah. I have no issue with it, and I think it's just gonna make the market, the economy, every company in it just more efficient and effective, and help companies move faster. It's I think it's good. I don't see any issue with candidates using AI automation. Why wouldn't you? You should tell an AI, hey, here are the exact things that I'm looking for. These are the types of jobs I'm interested in. And then have AI go out and do the applications. Like, why should somebody have to do that manual motion of applying and applying when, there's a good chance they're not even going to hear back from the company.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
totally agree.
So I have zero issue with that.
And maybe for candidates, the short list of companies that they know they're really excited about before interviewing, they still do themselves to put their best foot forward.
Yeah.
Then they get like a longer tail of opportunities and interviews. Yeah, I think maybe the place where I do take issue is if any of these AI tools, I'm not sure if this is the case, but if they're actually misrepresenting a candidate's experience and background and just jamming keywords in there that aren't actually relevant to their experience, because then I think it's helping no one. As soon as they go through June or like a actual recruiter interview, hiring manager interview, like it's going to be so easy to tell, and it's just going to be a waste of time for both sides.
Yeah, I think that's why it's almost like if there's going to be automation and AI leverage on one side, in order for the other side to actually absorb that and process that requires AI and automation.
Yeah,
Like it wouldn't like because if a company's getting a thousand more applicants every week or more, tens of thousands or whatever, and they're not leveraging AI or automation, like how are they supposed to get through that?
Yeah,
It's
totally.
it's like it has to be, you have to leverage it like a I
I
think
think
it's
but the
yeah.
other thing like you need like the AI that's generating the applications to be factual and
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, I think so. And people will stack in keywords. And I think one of the most common ways is, oh, I did this once in a project, or I watched a YouTube video on it. And there's that kind of stuff. And so that stuff's going to start to happen at scale. So you are going to have a lot more resumes
Yep.
of people that aren't qualified, but I don't know what it'll actually do to the ratio. Maybe it's still okay if for some kind of skilled knowledge worker role, if 3% of applicants, 5% of applicants are worth screening. If folks are using AI automation, will that ratio stay the same?
Yeah.
It's going to have a lot more volume. I don't know, but I
Yeah.
don't know if it'll get better, if it'll get worse in terms of the ratio of like relevancy of the applications.
Yeah.
Just don't know. But I think it's a
It
good thing.
matters.
Honestly, I think it's good.
I think so too. I think once both sides of the market move towards using AI, we're actually going to end up in a more efficient place, surprisingly.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with it, and I think companies are obviously gonna should be doing everything to be efficient and effective with their process. And I would hope you want to hire people that think the same way. You know what I mean? As
Right.
we said, you want people that know how to leverage technology, typically, or in a lot of roles you do. Not necessarily for every role, but at least in a lot of circles we run in, right? You want people that are adaptable and that
Yeah,
kind of
totally.
thing. Yes, I want to talk about Gem a little bit. So really just on where the product is today, what's coming up, some new possibly future releases. What do you have coming down? What are you currently doing and what do you have coming down the pipe right now with with Gem?
Yeah, totally. Happy to talk about a whole bunch of different products, but I think specifically on the AI front, given that we were just talking about that. So we've built out like a really strong matching and ranking engine, which takes in resumes on one side and then 5 to 10 criteria that the recruiter specifies on the other side for a
Yeah.
job, and then uses generative AI to rank and match and score resumes based on those 5 to 10 criteria. And so we've applied that to AI sourcing on top of 650 million public profiles. We've also applied that to your inbound applicants. So to our point earlier around companies getting inundated with applicants, folks can find the ones that are most likely to be the best fit much, much faster. And then
Hmm.
potentially they could advance those folks immediately to recruiter screen or even hiring manager screen if they score really high. And then they could use June for either the long tail or the mid tail to
Yeah.
screen the rest. It's a cool tie back to what you guys are doing. Next up, though, we're applying that same matching and ranking foundation to candidate rediscovery.
That's so funny that like how I was bringing that up earlier. It's like that's exactly what I'm hearing from customers and prospects is a use case they're really interested in.
Yeah.
So it's cool that
Oh, cool.
sounds like you're hearing the same or thinking the same way about it.
Just based on what I know about June, companies can only interview so many candidates, right? So they have to pick and choose. We help them identify the ones that are most likely to be worth a recruiter's time or a hiring manager's time.
Mhm.
Past that, you got to imagine that if June could do interviews for a much broader set, that more great people would be in the mix that maybe didn't know how to put their best foot forward with their resume or who interview better than and actually have other skills that aren't easy to demonstrate just from their written resume. No, I think
Yeah.
there's a really cool synergy between those two.
Let's say I was talking with a CEO of a company called Recruit CRM, which is
Oh yeah,
you know them? Okay.
yeah. Oh no, sorry, I was thinking about a different company, but yeah,
Okay. Yeah, Recruit CRM, Sean, their founder and CEO, a pretty cool story. They actually bootstrapped and they have hundreds of customers, I think around a couple hundred employees at this time. They might even have like some 1,000 customers, I'm not sure, but they do, it's an ATS, but it's like a recruiting automation solution for staffing companies.
cool.
And that was essentially like the exact use case we talked about potentially with a partnership with June and Recruit CRM was they have a kind of like an automation AI layer to identify profiles, right? Specifically for staffing of folks that are likely to be a fit, and then for June to be like the layer underneath that to shorten that make it a little bit smaller. from what they, so it's, I think that there's, and then I think just too, it just depends on like the industry and the use case. We're just gonna have to see where it seems to fit the best. But
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. And I could see the same thing applying to candidate rediscovery stuff we're working on.
Mhm.
In fact, there you have even more candidates or folks in your CRM that you've identified that could be a good fit for a role because you're not just limited to the applications for a 1 or 2 week or 3 week period for this specific job that's been opened up because you can actually look across all previous applicants, all previous folks in your CRM that the recruiting team has identified as a good fit. And so there, the volume's even higher. So I think the idea that folks could use like GEMS AI to identify, I don't know, maybe the 10, 20 gems, so to speak, that
Yeah.
they want a recruiter to talk to immediately. And then they could use June to screen hundreds to see if they're a good fit for this new role that just opened up to broaden the pool, maybe double the amount of qualified folks they can bring into the pipeline by seeing a much broader view of candidates. Sounds really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, TNA rediscovery is really cool. And I think it's just traditionally an area that has been somewhat underserved in the from recruiting technology. I think that there's a lot of area for just providing a better experience there for recruiting tech and more value to customers. And it's interesting. It's like for June, we actually have a customer that's starting with us in, I guess, a week from today, who they only want to use June for candidate rediscovery.
Cool.
They're not, they, to start, they're actually not going to be using us for inbound screening. They're screening inbound applicants. It's
Why?
going to be, what's
Why?
that?
Why, oh yeah. Why not also use it for screening?
Because so this one is it's a staffing company in the GovCon federal space,
Ah, yeah.
and it's like cleared talent. And so it's a limited talent pool. It's still big, but it's like somewhat, it's not infinite.
Yeah.
And they're specifically, they recruit for like engineers, right? Like a specific type of engineer, like data engineers in this case.
Yep.
And so what they're looking for is, of course, like things change over time. So they want June to be able to reach out after 6 months and say, hey, in February, you spoke with Debbie and expressed interest in X, Y, and Z, or had mentioned that you're currently doing this. How are things going? Are you actively looking at this point? Are you still looking for this type of role? Or whatever the kind of requalification is, because of course, data in the system may not be current anymore. It's a way to re-engage with that talent, stay close to them, stay in front of them.
Cool.
So it's like an engagement and rediscovery kind of requalification motion,
Yeah,
which
that
is
makes
like
sense.
exactly that's the use case that they're going to be using at first. So they want to
Totally.
put that out first.
And when the talent pool is more narrow, then, maybe they're actually able to interview most of the folks that come inbound that match that very narrow qualification, but then they've got this
Yeah.
much broader pool of people already in their system that they're just not engaging with
I
because,
think so. And I think there's also like the relationship piece. I think specifically
yeah,
they feel like they really want to speak with everyone, build that relationship off the bat. And they're willing to speak with people that aren't qualified. Like they're just like,
yeah,
no, it's worth it because they have to get to the select few that are. So I think that just their workflow, it makes sense for that. But yeah, it was a little bit surprising because I got on the Discovery and to do a demo and I was ready to, of course, like we bring up rediscovery, but I was also expecting to talk about inbound. And the CEO is just, no, I want to, this is what we need. We need
cool, cool,
rediscovery. We need to re-engage. We need to stay in front of them consistently. There's sometimes we speak to somebody, we may not place them until 2 years later. And I need a consistent way to engage with them, to stay up to date with what they're doing, what they're looking for, and to remind them about us, right? And that's essentially what they were looking for.
cool. Good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think rediscovery is really cool. And I think again, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for companies.
Yeah, me too. That's just a gold mine. If I can put some stats behind that, we definitely serve a decent number of staffing agencies. A lot of our customers are in-house. For in-house customers, across the board, 30 to 50% of folks that are hired already existed in your CRM or ATS before you
Dang.
hire them. And then for enterprise customers, it's something like 60, 70% of the larger ones. And yeah, that's a gold mine. But
Wow.
when you think about like how folks are actually entering process, it's in really inefficient ways. It's people going out and cold sourcing them again, or companies running
Just
like
so
ads,
expensive.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you're building pipeline and set 60, 70% of them, if you're an enterprise customer, are already people that you have relationships with, but you're paying all over again to build those pipes.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I think it's like one of the reasons of many that I really like the idea of optimizing inbound and candidate rediscovery is because outbound motions can be very expensive from a headcount perspective, and they're
Oh,
important, and they're still like probably the most, I would say, for specifically for knowledge workers and specific profiles, I would still
yeah,
you need an outbound motion, right? Like at Secure Vision, most of the hires we help our customers with are still outbound
totally.
sourcing. But nonetheless, that's because there hasn't been tech, I think, that has really optimized inbound and rediscovery very well. The
Yeah.
resources, there's just been gaps in the technology. And I think that those things are now like more products are coming out to essentially increase contribution to hiring from inbound, increase contribution to hiring from rediscovery and make that a more significant ROI motion. And that should help at least balance out the cost where the sourcing efforts, it's going to cost more, but you can be really dialed in and get those new profiles. And that's really if you're paying a senior recruiter and a recruiting tech stack for outbound, which is expensive, more expensive, like you should have them laser focused on building those net new relationships, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Don't want them like exactly reinventing the wheel with folks that you already know about. Same for inbound though. Like companies spend millions of dollars on like job advertising, and 60-70% of the people they hire are people that are already in their database.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
So I think it applies to both. It just
yeah, for sure.
across the board, like the top of the funnel is quite expensive. So if you
Yeah.
can augment that with people you already know about, no brainer.
Yeah, yeah. Just so one quick question on the rediscovery motion that you're building out. Essentially, it's going in and you're able to search for folks that match based on their screening interviews or their resumes, or is it like a combination? Like, how is Jim surfacing the candidates that are the best for a role?
Yeah, so it's two things. One is on top of the resume, we'll use that same ranking and matching engine and help you find folks that best match those 5 to 10 criteria that like the recruiter or hiring manager has defined for that job. And it'll look across your entire ATS and CRM database for folks that are the highest match. But then on top of that, you can also add some smart filters. So you can filter out folks based on like how far they got in the interview process, what the blend of scorecards was. You can,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's really cool.
yeah, folks out based
Yeah.
on have you had a touch point with them in the last 3 to 6 months, or were they rejected within the last year? A lot
Hmm.
of the really common rules of engagement that companies might have about like when they want to re-interview folks. And because GEM is an all-in-one recruiting platform that covers sourcing, CRM, scheduling, even like talent marketing capabilities, ATS, like we've got the most complete source of truth for all those different touch points that you
Yeah.
can put on top of.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's integrates
All
so
ties
well,
together.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome, man. Yeah, I
Yeah.
got to get my hands on more of the products that you have right now. Still using, we're on the sourcing product of building cadences and outreach campaigns, which is, I think, your bread and butter. At least it was back in the day. So it's the primary product, and you've of course grown so much since then.
Yeah,
Uh,
let's get you set up on it, James. I'd love
yeah,
to get you guys the full, yeah, the full power of Gem all in one.
yeah, we got to do it, man. I have been meaning to talk to you about that because I do want to do everything through Gem at this point. It just based on what you're building, it would make things a lot easier for us too.
You got it. I feel like we've had a really productive pod. We've figured out potential partnership opportunities between June and Gem, and
Yeah,
yeah, we're gonna get you onto Gem all in one. Let's do it.
yeah, hell yeah, man. Yeah, as always, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights. And I always enjoy these episodes a lot. I'm happy we get to do them on a regular basis.
Yeah, me too. Good to be here. Thanks, James.
Awesome. All right, take care, and everybody tuning in. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.